On a bleak slope in Russia's Ural Mountains, in February 1959, searchers found a canvas tent half buried in snow, and it had been sliced open from the inside. Leading away from it, down toward the tree line, were the footprints of 9 people who had walked out into a night of roughly -30°C, most of them barefoot or in socks. The hikers who left those prints were young, fit, and counted among the most capable winter trekkers in the Soviet Union. Within hours of leaving that tent, all 9 of them were dead. More than 60 years later, the world is still arguing about why. The story begins in Sverdlovsk, today's Ekaterinburg, an industrial city on the eastern edge of the Urals. In January 1959, a group formed at the Ural Polytechnic Institute around a 23-year-old radio engineering student named Igor Dyatlov, serious, meticulous, already a veteran of hard winter routes. His plan was ambitious: a Grade 3 trek, the toughest classification of the era, roughly 300 kilometers on skis through the northern Urals to a mountain called Otorten. With him went 9 companions, Zinaida Kolmogorova and Lyudmila Dubinina, 2 of the strongest young women in the Institute's hiking club, Rustem Slobodin, Yuri Doroshenko, Yuri Krivonischenko, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, whose French father had died in Stalin's camps, and one outsider, Semyon Zolotaryov, a 37-year-old decorated war veteran and professional guide, older than the rest, tattooed, charming, and to this day the most puzzled-over member of the group. They left Sverdlovsk by train on January 23, in high spirits. The surviving photographs show them clowning on station platforms and singing to a mandolin. From the town of Ivdel they rode a truck north to Vizhay, the last inhabited outpost before the wilderness. And there, on January 28, the 10th member of the expedition, Yuri Yudin, was forced to turn back. A flare-up of joint pain made the route impossible for him. A photograph survives of Lyudmila Dubinina hugging him goodbye. That twist of bad luck made Yuri Yudin the only member of the Dyatlov group to survive, and he would spend the next 54 years asking why he lived and his friends did not. For 4 days, the remaining 9 skied north along frozen rivers and old Mansi hunting trails, deeper into the taiga. Their diaries and film rolls from those days survive, and they are utterly ordinary: jokes about who has to fix the stove, debates about love and science, sketches, songs, notes on wind and snow. On February 1, they cached spare food and gear in a wooded valley for the return leg, and in the afternoon they climbed onto the open shoulder of a mountain the local Mansi people call Kolat-Syakhl. The name is usually translated as Dead Mountain, and that sounds like an omen, but the truth is more mundane. In Mansi it describes a barren height where nothing grows, not a curse. The sinister gloss came later. In failing light and rising wind, they dug a platform into the snow slope and pitched their tent, choosing to camp high on the exposed slope rather than retreat to the tree line, a decision debated ever since. The last frames on their cameras show them shoveling snow in the dusk, hoods up, faces bent against the wind. Then the record stops. Dyatlov had promised to send a telegram from Vizhay by around February 12. The date passed. At first nobody panicked, winter routes ran late all the time. But by February 20, relatives were demanding action, and the institute sent out volunteer search parties of students and instructors, soon joined by police, soldiers, aircraft, and Mansi hunters who knew the terrain. On February 26, searchers found the tent on the slope of Kolat-Syakhl, its ridge just breaking the snow surface. What they found stopped them cold. The tent was partly collapsed and drifted over, but inside, everything was strangely orderly. 9 pairs of boots. Jackets and blankets. Food laid out, a slab of ham sliced and ready. Cameras, diaries. Money, Dyatlov's storm jacket. The stove, unlit. And the canvas itself bore long slashes. A forensic examination later confirmed the cuts had been made from the inside, by the people within, hacking their way out of their own shelter. Below the tent, searchers found 8 or 9 sets of footprints preserved in the compacted snow, prints of socked feet, of bare feet, of a single boot. They did not show a sprint. They descended the slope in a loose, almost orderly group, walking, together, down toward the forest for about 1.5 kilometers, until deeper snow swallowed the trail. At the tree lean stood a tall cedar, and beneath it the searchers found the remains of a small fire, and the first 2 bodies. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko lay in their underwear, shoeless, in cold that had likely reached -30. The cedar's branches were snapped off up to 5 meters above the ground, and traces on the trunk suggested someone had climbed it with bare, freezing hands, perhaps to look back toward the tent, perhaps to tear down branches for the fire. Then, spaced out on the slope between the cedar and the tent, 3 more were found: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kalmogorova, Rustam Slobodin, each lying oriented uphill, back toward the tent, as if they had died mid-effort, trying to return. The medical conclusion for all 5 was hypothermia. They had frozen to death trying to get back inside the shelter they had cut their way out of. Slobodin also had a hairline skull fracture, survivable on its own, consistent with a fall on ice, but ambiguous enough to haunt the case forever. In March 1959, Sverdlovsk buried its first 5 dead, and thousands of people lined the streets behind the coffins. Relatives later recalled that the skin of the dead looked strangely dark, an orange-brown tint, a detail that fed rumors for decades, though forensic workers point out that wind, sun, and hard frost do exactly that to exposed skin. The city was told almost nothing. And the case was about to get stranger. The last 4 were missing for 2 more months. Only on May 4, as the snowpack began to rot, did searchers probing a ravine 75 meters from the cedar find them under 4 meters of snow: Ludmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles. They were better dressed than the others, some wearing clothing cut from the bodies of their dead friends, and they lay near a hollow floored with cut fir branches, a den, a shelter, built in the dark by people fighting to live. Their injuries changed everything. Thibault-Brignoles had a massive skull fracture. Dubinina and Zolotaryov had crushed chests, ribs shattered in multiple places, trauma the forensic examiner compared to the force of a car crash, yet with almost no external wounds, as if some immense, diffuse pressure had done it. Dubinina was missing her tongue and eyes, Zolotaryov was missing his eyes. That detail has launched 1,000 nightmares, so it deserves an honest flag. The bodies had spent 3 months lying in a snow-fed stream, and decomposition and scavenging animals are the explanation forensic reviewers consider most likely. Horrifying to hear, but not, by itself, evidence of anything stranger. One more detail sat quietly in the case file: when several items of the victims' clothing were tested, they showed measurable traces of beta radioactivity. That is not legend, it is in the documents. The most grounded explanation is also the most Soviet one. Krivonischenko worked at the Mayak plutonium facility and had taken part in cleanup after the 1957 KYSHTYM nuclear disaster, one of the worst radiation accidents in history, so contamination could plausibly have traveled on old clothing. Plausible, but not proven, and the radiation finding remains one of the case's genuinely odd loose threads. In May 1959, the lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, closed the case with a phrase that has echoed ever since: the hikers died because of a compelling natural force they were unable to overcome. The files went into the archive. It is often said the area was closed to hikers for 3 years afterward, a claim repeated so widely it has become part of the legend, though the documentation behind it is thin. Into that official silence rushed every theory imaginable. Multiple witnesses across the northern Urals, including other hiking groups, reported glowing orbs and strange lights in the night sky in February and March 1959. Researchers have since matched several of those sightings to Soviet rocket launches visible from hundreds of kilometers away, but at the time even investigator Ivanov privately wondered about fireballs. Others proposed secret military tests, parachute mines, experimental weapons, pointing to the era's obsessive secrecy. No documented test at that place and time has ever surfaced. The American writer Donnie Icar suggested a rare wind phenomenon, a Kármán vortex street, might have generated infrasound capable of triggering irrational panic, intriguing, and untestable. There is a KGB spy exchange theory built around Zolotaryov's strange biography. There were escaped prisoner rumors, but camp records from that winter show no escapes. Suspicion briefly fell on the local Monsey people, and it deserves to be buried permanently. The Monsey helped the search from the first day, and no outside tracks were ever found near the tent. And yes, there is a Yeti theory. Treat every one of these as exactly what they are, speculation stacked on top of a genuine mystery. Then, 60 years on, Russia officially looked again. In 2019, the Prosecutor General's office reopened a review of the case, and in 2020 it announced its conclusion, a slab avalanche. Not the Hollywood kind, a relatively small, dense plate of wind-packed snow released on the slope above the tent, likely destabilized by the very cut the hikers had dug for their platform. The slab struck the tent in the dark. The hikers, some of them possibly already injured, cut their way out and retreated downhill, fearing a larger slide. Visibility that night was around 16 meters, and in the wind, the darkness, and the cold, they simply could not find their way back. In 2021, two scientists, Johann Gaum and Alexander Puzrin, published a model in a Nature Family journal showing that a small, delayed slab release was physically possible on that slope, that mountain winds could have kept loading snow above the tent for hours after the hikers fell asleep, and that a dense slab landing on bodies lying over a rigid floor of skis could produce exactly those chest and skull injuries without external wounds. It is the leading explanation, and it is a good one. But it is not unanimous, and honesty requires saying so. Skeptics note that the searchers in 1959 reported no obvious avalanche debris, that the slope looks gentler than classic avalanche terrain, and that the tent's entrance pole was still standing. Defenders answer that small slab slides can leave almost no trace after 3 weeks of wind and fresh snowfall. Science can now say, this could have happened. It cannot yet say beyond all doubt, this is what happened. What we know for certain is only this: 9 capable people judged, in a matter of moments, that a dark, open mountainside at 30 below, in socks and bare feet, was safer than their own tent. Every theory ever proposed lives inside that single terrible decision. The pass where they died now bears their leader's name, Dyatlov Pass. A memorial stone carries 9 faces. Yuri Yudin, the man who turned back at Vizhay, spent his life attending the reunions and combing the archives, and when he died in 2013, he was laid to rest alongside his 9 friends in Ekaterinburg. The mountain itself is unchanged, a bald, wind-scoured shoulder of rock and snow where, for one night in 1959, something happened that we can very nearly, but not quite, explain. If you want more forgotten history that sounds made up but isn't, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.